The morning mist clung to the towering Douglas firs like ghostly fingers as the Parker family loaded their hiking gear into their silver Honda Pilot. It was Memorial Day weekend 2023, and the Olympic National Forest promised the perfect escape from Seattle's urban sprawl. David Parker adjusted the straps on his daughter's bright orange backpack, while his wife Sarah double-checked their trail map one final time. "Dad, can we please take the longer trail today?" 14-year-old Emily Parker asked, her voice carrying that familiar mix of teenage determination and excitement. Her auburn hair caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the canopy above their campsite. "I've been training for cross-country, and Mrs. Henderson says endurance hiking builds the best foundation." David smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. Emily had always been their little adventurer, the one who collected pine cones and knew the names of every bird they encountered. At 14, she stood nearly as tall as her mother, with the same piercing green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the world around her. "The Hoh River Trail it is, then," he agreed, folding the map and tucking it into his jacket pocket. "But we stick together, no wandering off. These woods can be tricky, even for experienced hikers." Sarah Parker wrapped her arms around her family, breathing in the crisp mountain air. "I still can't believe we almost cancelled this trip because of work," she said, squeezing Emily's shoulder. "Sometimes we need to remember what really matters." The family set out at 9:30 a.m. sharp, their boots crunching softly on the needle-covered trail. Emily walked ahead, her orange backpack a bright beacon against the deep greens and browns of the ancient rainforest. She paused frequently to photograph moss-covered logs and to point out interesting rock formations to her parents. If you're watching this story unfold and wondering what happens next, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers from around the world who share our fascination with these mysterious cases. By 11:45 a.m., they had covered nearly 4 miles of increasingly challenging terrain. The trail wound deeper into the forest, where centuries-old trees created a cathedral-like atmosphere that muffled sound and filtered light into ethereal beams. Emily was in her element, stopping to examine every fern and listening intently to her father's explanations about the ecosystem around them. "Can you hear that?" Emily asked suddenly, holding up her hand for silence. A faint, rushing sound echoed through the trees ahead. "Is that the river?" David consulted his map and nodded. "Should be just around that bend. Perfect spot for lunch." He checked his watch. "Right on schedule, too." But as they rounded the curve in the trail, they discovered that recent rainfall had transformed the usually manageable creek crossing into a rushing torrent of muddy water. Fallen trees and debris had created a natural dam upstream, causing the water to back up and flood the trail for at least 50 yards in either direction. "Well, that's not on the map," Sarah said, surveying the unexpected obstacle. The water was moving too fast and appeared too deep to cross safely with their equipment. Emily studied the situation with the analytical mind that made her excel in her advanced placement classes. "What if we follow the creek upstream? Maybe we can find a safer crossing point, or at least a way around this mess." David weighed their options. They could turn back and take the shorter loop trail, disappointing Emily, or they could explore alternative routes. The Forest Service maps showed several interconnecting trails in the area, though some were marked as more challenging or poorly maintained. "There's a secondary trail about half a mile upstream," he said, tracing a thin line on the map with his finger. "It's not as well marked, but it should connect back to the main trail system on the other side of this flooding." Sarah looked uncertain. "Are we sure that's wise? We don't know those trails as well." "I've got my GPS, compass, and the emergency beacon," David reassured her. "Plus we've got plenty of daylight left." Emily's right. If we're going to do this hike, we should do it properly. The decision that would change their lives forever was made with the casual confidence of an experienced hiking family who had never encountered real danger in the wilderness. They began following the swollen creek upstream, Emily leading the way with her characteristic enthusiasm and careful attention to the terrain. At 1:15 p.m., Emily Parker stepped off the established trail for what her family believed would be a brief detour. The ancient forest closed around them like a living entity, and with each step deeper into the wilderness, they moved further from the safety of well-traveled paths and closer to a mystery that would haunt the Pacific Northwest for months to come. The last photograph on Emily's phone, recovered later from her backpack, showed her parents smiling at the camera with a massive cedar tree behind them. The timestamp read 1:43 p.m. It was the last image of their family together. By 4:30 p.m., David Parker's confident navigation had transformed into barely controlled panic. The secondary trail they'd been following had branched into 3 different paths, none of which appeared on their map. Worse still, the dense canopy above made GPS reception spotty at best, with their device showing their location jumping erratically across impossible coordinates. "Let's just retrace our steps," Sarah suggested for the 3rd time, her voice tight with worry. "We can find our way back to the main trail and take the shorter route." David stopped and pulled out his compass, trying to make sense of their position. The magnetic needle seemed to waver more than usual, possibly affected by the mineral deposits common in the Olympic Peninsula. "The problem is, I'm not entirely sure which path we took to get here. These game trails all look the same." Emily had been unusually quiet for the past hour, studying their surroundings, with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for difficult math problems. "Dad, look at the moss growth on these trees," she said, pointing to the thick green carpet covering the north side of several massive trunks. "We've been walking in circles. I recognize that fallen log from about an hour ago." The realization hit all 3 family members simultaneously. They were lost. "Okay, don't panic," David said, though his own voice betrayed his growing anxiety. "We've got emergency supplies, the weather is stable, and people know where we were supposed to be hiking. Let's find a clearing where I can get a better GPS signal." They spent the next 2 hours searching for higher ground or any break in the forest canopy that might restore their electronic navigation. Emily proved to be their most valuable asset during this time, using skills she'd learned in her environmental science class to identify landmarks and track their movement. She pointed out subtle changes in vegetation that indicated elevation differences and noted the direction of water flow in the small streams they crossed. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting longer shadows between the ancient trees, the family was forced to confront a sobering reality. They would be spending the night in the forest. "At least we have our emergency gear," Sarah said, trying to maintain optimism, as they selected a relatively flat area beneath a large cedar for their impromptu campsite. "And it's supposed to be clear tonight, so we won't have to deal with rain." David activated their emergency locator beacon, a small device designed to transmit their GPS coordinates to search and rescue teams. The red light blinked reassuringly, though they had no way of knowing if the signal was getting through the thick forest canopy. Emily helped gather dry kindling while her parents set up their emergency shelter. Despite the circumstances, she seemed remarkably calm and resourceful. "You know what Mrs. Rodriguez always says in biology class," she said, arranging small branches in a neat pile. "Humans are incredibly adaptable. We've survived in environments like this for thousands of years." They managed to start a small fire just as full darkness settled over the forest. The flames provided warmth and light, but also emphasized how completely they were surrounded by an alien environment. The sounds of the nighttime forest, owl calls, rustling leaves, and the distant crack of falling branches seemed amplified in the darkness. "Tomorrow morning, we'll head downhill until we find water," David planned aloud, studying their maps by firelight. "All the streams in this area eventually flow toward the Hoh River, which will lead us back to civilization." But when morning came, Emily Parker was gone. Sarah discovered the absence first, reaching across their shared sleeping area at dawn to wake her daughter. Her hand found only empty space and a cold sleeping bag. Emily's hiking boots were missing, along with her backpack, but everything else, her jacket, her phone, even her favorite water bottle, remained at the campsite. "Emily!" Sarah's scream shattered the morning stillness. "Emily!" David bolted upright, immediately understanding the situation. He grabbed their emergency whistle and began blowing the standard 3-blast distress signal, while Sarah called their daughter's name in increasingly frantic tones. They searched the immediate area in expanding circles, finding no trace of Emily's passage through the thick undergrowth. The ground was too hard and covered with fallen leaves to show clear footprints, and the morning dew had been too light to disturb. "She wouldn't just wander off," Sarah kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "Emily's too smart for that. She knows better." David was already calculating in his head. Even if Emily had left immediately after they fell asleep, she couldn't have traveled far in the dark, through unfamiliar forest, unless she had found a trail or some other path that allowed faster movement, unless something had happened that forced her to move quickly, unless... He pushed the darker possibilities from his mind and focused on action. They had to find her before the situation became truly desperate. By 8 a.m., David and Sarah had searched every accessible area within a quarter-mile of their campsite. They found no signs of their daughter, no broken branches or disturbed vegetation that might indicate her passage. It was as if Emily Parker had simply vanished into the ancient forest, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread. David reactivated their emergency beacon and began the long whistle sequence that would signal their exact emergency to any search teams in the area. But in his heart, he knew they were too deep in the wilderness for anyone to reach them quickly. Emily had been missing for 4 hours when the first helicopter appeared in the distance, its rotors beating a steady rhythm against the morning sky. Hope and terror warred in equal measure as her parents realized that their family adventure had become something far more sinister. The search for Emily Parker was about to begin, but the ancient forest was already preparing to guard its secrets with the same patience it had shown for centuries. Within 6 hours of David Parker's emergency beacon activation, the largest search and rescue operation in Olympic National Forest history was mobilized. King County Sheriff's Department Coordinator Lieutenant Maria Santos had seen plenty of missing hiker cases, but something about 14-year-old Emily Parker's disappearance immediately struck her as unusual. "Walk me through it one more time," Lieutenant Santos said, sitting across from David and Sarah Parker in the incident command tent that had been hastily erected at the Solduke Ranger Station. Her voice was professionally calm, but her eyes missed nothing as she studied the distraught parents. "You're absolutely certain Emily was in her sleeping bag when you went to sleep?" David nodded emphatically. "She was right between us. Sarah checked on her around 11 p.m. when she got up to use the woods. Emily was sound asleep." "And you heard nothing during the night? No sounds, no movement, nothing that might have woken her?" Sarah wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Nothing. The forest was quiet, except for the usual night sounds. If Emily had gotten up, we would have heard her. She wasn't the type to sneak around." Lieutenant Santos made notes on her pad while studying the detailed topographical maps spread across the fold-out table. The area where the Parkers had made their unplanned camp was marked with a red X, surrounded by thousands of acres of some of the most challenging wilderness terrain in the Pacific Northwest. "Here's what we know," she said, addressing both the parents and the assembled search team leaders. "Emily Parker is 14 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, approximately 115 pounds, auburn hair, green eyes. She was last seen wearing dark blue hiking pants, a grey long-sleeve shirt, and brown hiking boots. She took her orange backpack but left her phone, jacket and water bottle at the campsite. Search and rescue team leader Jake Morrison stepped forward, a weathered man in his 50s who had coordinated hundreds of wilderness rescues over his career. The fact that she took her pack but left essential items suggests this wasn't a planned departure. Most lost hikers either take everything or nothing. "What are you thinking?" Lieutenant Santos asked. "Three possibilities," Morrison said, counting on his fingers. 1. She became disoriented during the night, maybe needed to relieve herself, and wandered away from camp in the dark. 2. She heard something that concerned her and went to investigate. 3. Someone or something forced her to leave. The third possibility hung heavy in the air. While animal attacks were rare in the Olympic Peninsula, they weren't unheard of. Black bears and the occasional cougar inhabited these forests, and a confused or startled animal might cause a person to flee without thinking. Dr. Amanda Chen, a behavioral analyst who specialized in missing persons cases, had driven over from Seattle specifically for this case. "Tell me about Emily's personality," she said to the Parkers. "Was she impulsive, adventurous, likely to investigate sounds or situations on her own?" "Just the opposite," Sarah answered immediately. "Emily is incredibly methodical and careful. She's our planner, the one who researches everything before we go anywhere. She would never just wander off, especially not in the dark. She's also extremely responsible," David added. "Emily knows wilderness safety better than most adults. She wouldn't leave camp without telling us, and she certainly wouldn't go anywhere without proper gear." Dr. Chen made notes while Morrison studied the search grid he was developing. The area where Emily could have traveled on foot during the night was substantial, encompassing roughly 40 square miles of dense forest, steep ravines, and countless small streams that could trap or disorient a lost hiker. "We're bringing in K9 units from 3 counties, Morrison announced. "The dogs will start at the campsite and work outward in expanding circles. We've also got 2 helicopters with thermal imaging equipment, and teams of ground searchers covering all the main trails and water sources in the area." What Morrison didn't mention, but Lieutenant Santos understood, was that they had perhaps 72 hours before the search transitioned from rescue to recovery. After 3 days, the likelihood of finding a missing person alive in wilderness conditions dropped dramatically. The first K9 team arrived at the Parker campsite at 2 p.m. on the day after Emily's disappearance. Ranger Sarah Martinez watched as the German shepherd named Zeus methodically circled the area where Emily had slept, his nose working constantly to pick up her scent trail. "He's got something," his handler announced, as Zeus suddenly became more animated, his tail wagging as he moved toward the edge of the small clearing where the family had made camp. The dog led them roughly 50 yards north of the campsite, moving confidently through the thick undergrowth, but then Zeus stopped abruptly at the edge of a small stream, whining and circling in apparent confusion. "The scent trail ends here," the handler reported over his radio. "Water crossing, probably. The girl definitely came this way, but we can't track her on the other side." Additional K9 teams were called in to search both directions along the stream, but none could pick up Emily's trail beyond the water. It was as if she had simply vanished at that point, leaving no trace for even the most sensitive K9 noses to follow. By the end of the first day, search teams had covered nearly 15 square miles of forest without finding any sign of Emily Parker. Her parents maintained a vigil at the command post, studying maps and listening to radio chatter from the search teams, hoping for any word that might bring their daughter home. "These forests have been here for thousands of years," Sarah said quietly as darkness fell on their second night of living every parent's worst nightmare. "How can one little girl just disappear without leaving any trace?" Lieutenant Santos had been wondering the same thing. In her 15 years of coordinating searches, she had never encountered a case where the trail went completely cold so quickly. Missing hikers usually left some sign of their passage: broken branches, disturbed earth, items dropped along the way. Emily Parker seemed to have been absorbed by the forest itself, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense that this case was unlike any they had handled before. The search would continue for 12 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers and thousands of man-hours. But Emily Parker remained as elusive as morning mist, and the ancient forest kept its secrets locked away beneath the towering canopy that had witnessed countless mysteries over the centuries. 12 weeks after Emily Parker vanished into the Olympic rainforest, local hunter Marcus Webb was tracking an injured elk when he made the discovery that would reignite the investigation. It was a crisp October morning, and Webb had been following Bloodsign for nearly 2 miles when something bright orange caught his eye, hanging impossibly high in the branches of an ancient Douglas fir. "I thought it was some kind of trail marker at first," Webb later told investigators, "but the color was wrong, and it was way too high up for any hiker to have placed it there. Had to be at least 25 feet off the ground." Using climbing gear from his truck, Webb ascended the massive tree and retrieved what he immediately recognized as a child's backpack. The bright orange fabric was weathered and faded from months of exposure to the Pacific Northwest's persistent moisture, but the contents were largely intact, sealed inside waterproof compartments. Emily Parker's school ID was the first item that confirmed Webb's growing suspicion about what he had found. Her name was written in careful handwriting on notebook pages, homework assignments dated just days before her disappearance. But it was the location of the discovery that sent chills through the investigative team. The tree where we found the backpack is 3.7 miles from the Parker family campsite, Lieutenant Santos explained to the packed briefing room. But here's the problem. There's no way Emily could have traveled that distance and direction given what we know about her disappearance. Detective Ray Morrison, Jake's younger brother, who had recently joined the case as the lead investigator, spread out detailed topographical maps showing the terrain between the campsite and the discovery location. "Look at this elevation profile," he said, tracing the route with a red marker. "She would have had to cross 2 major ravines and climb nearly 800 feet in elevation, in the dark. Without proper gear, it's essentially impossible." Dr. Amanda Chen studied the photographs of the backpack's condition and location with growing unease. "The weathering pattern is consistent with long-term exposure," she said, "but the placement is all wrong. No natural process could have gotten that backpack into those branches. It was deliberately placed there." The implication was clear but unspoken. Someone else had been involved in Emily's disappearance. FBI agent Rebecca Torres had been quietly monitoring the case from Seattle, but the backpack discovery prompted her to take active involvement. As a specialist in crimes against children, she brought resources and expertise that the local investigators desperately needed. "Let's examine what was in the backpack," Agent Torres said, spreading evidence photos across the conference table. School supplies, homework, energy bars, a small first aid kit, and her emergency whistle. "But notice what's missing. Her phone was left at the campsite, but where's her digital camera? Emily's parents mentioned she always carried a small camera for nature photography." David Parker confirmed that Emily's camera was missing when shown the inventory of backpack contents. "She got it for her birthday just 2 months before our trip. A waterproof digital camera specifically for hiking. She was so proud of it, never went anywhere without it." The missing camera became a crucial piece of the puzzle. If Emily had been taking photographs, those images might provide clues about what happened during her final hours. But despite extensive searches of the area around both the campsite and the backpack location, the camera remained missing. Agent Torres decided to expand the investigation beyond the immediate family. "Tell me about Emily's relationships," she said to the Parkers during a private interview. "Friends, teachers, anyone who might have been concerned about her or showed unusual interest in her activities." Emily was well liked at school, Sarah replied. She had a close group of friends, mostly from her advanced classes and the cross-country team. No boyfriends yet. She was more focused on academics and sports. What about online activity, social media, gaming, any digital interactions that might be relevant? David hesitated before answering. We monitored Emily's online activity pretty carefully. She had Instagram and Snapchat accounts, but mostly shared nature photos and school events, nothing that seemed concerning to us. But when Agent Torres obtained warrants for Emily's digital records, a more complex picture emerged. Emily had been active in several online forums dedicated to wilderness survival and nature photography. Her posts showed increasing interest in off-trail exploration and finding hidden places that most hikers never see. More troubling was a series of private messages Emily had exchanged with a user named Trail Ghost in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The conversation started innocently enough, with Trail Ghost complimenting Emily's photography skills and sharing tips about less traveled areas in the Olympic Peninsula. Look at this message thread, Agent Torres showed Lieutenant Santos. Trail Ghost specifically mentions the Hoh River area and suggests secret trails that lead to amazing photographic opportunities. The last message was sent just 3 days before the Parker family trip. The FBI's cybercrimes unit traced the Trail Ghost account through multiple layers of anonymization, but the trail led to a dead end. The account had been created using stolen identity information and accessed through public Wi-Fi networks, making it nearly impossible to identify the user. Meanwhile, the search teams had refocused their efforts on the area around the backpack discovery. If someone had deliberately placed Emily's backpack in that tree, they might have left other evidence nearby. Ground-penetrating radar teams were brought in to search for buried evidence, while K-9 units trained specifically for detecting human remains combed through the surrounding forest. On the 15th day of the renewed search, cadaver dog Max alerted to something buried beneath a large fallen log, approximately half a mile from the backpack tree. The excavation was painstakingly slow, conducted with archaeological precision to preserve any potential evidence. What they found changed everything. Buried 18 inches beneath the decaying log were Emily's missing camera and something far more sinister. A collection of personal items that clearly belonged to other missing persons. Hair ties, jewelry, and identification documents that matched descriptions of people who had vanished in the Pacific Northwest over the past 5 years. We're not dealing with an isolated incident, Agent Torres announced to the expanded task force that now included investigators from 3 states. This appears to be the work of someone who has been targeting vulnerable hikers in remote areas for years. The camera's memory card contained 147 photographs taken during Emily's final day. The last images, time-stamped at 2:17 p.m. on the day she disappeared, showed someone approaching through the trees, a figure whose face was obscured by shadow and distance, but whose presence filled the frame with an unmistakable sense of menace. Emily Parker's disappearance was no longer just a missing person case. It had become the key to unraveling a pattern of predatory behavior that had been hidden in the depths of America's most remote wilderness areas for far too long. The ancient forest was finally ready to reveal some of its darkest secrets, but the truth about Emily's fate remained locked away in places that even the most determined investigators had yet to discover. The photograph from Emily's camera changed everything. Enhanced by FBI forensic specialists, the image revealed crucial details that had been lost in shadow and pixelation. The figure approaching Emily appeared to be a tall man, wearing dark outdoor clothing and carrying what looked like professional hiking equipment. Most significantly, image analysis revealed a distinctive tattoo on his left forearm, a stylized eagle design that would prove to be the break investigators had been desperately seeking. This isn't random predatory behavior, Agent Torres explained to the Joint Task Force that now included representatives from 7 different law enforcement agencies. The buried cache of personal items shows planning, organization, and a pattern of behavior spanning at least 5 years. We're dealing with someone who specifically targets isolated hikers in remote wilderness areas. FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Michael Foster had been studying the case files and crime scene evidence for 2 weeks before presenting his preliminary profile. Our subject is likely a white male, 35-50 years old, with extensive wilderness experience and possibly military or survival training. He's familiar with the Olympic Peninsula and other remote areas where similar disappearances have occurred. The tattoo became the focus of an intensive investigation. Cross-referencing military records, wilderness guide certifications, and law enforcement databases eventually produced a list of potential matches. One name stood out immediately: Thomas Brennan, a 42-year-old former Army Ranger who had been working as a wilderness survival instructor and freelance hunting guide throughout the Pacific Northwest. Brennan's military records showed exemplary service, including deployments in Afghanistan, where he had specialized in tracking and reconnaissance. After his discharge in 2018, he had settled in Port Angeles and established a small business offering wilderness survival courses and guided hunting expeditions. "Look at his client list," Detective Morrison said, studying Brennan's business records. "He's been guiding hunting and hiking trips in the exact areas where people have gone missing: Olympic Peninsula, North Cascades, Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. The pattern is undeniable." More disturbing was the discovery that Brennan had been present in the Olympic National Forest during the weekend when Emily Parker disappeared. His business record showed he was supposed to be guiding a client on a multi-day hunting expedition. But the client had cancelled at the last minute due to a family emergency. Surveillance teams were immediately deployed to monitor Brennan's property, a remote cabin on 20 acres of forested land outside Port Angeles. What they observed through long-range cameras and listening devices suggested that their suspect was not only aware of the investigation, but was actively preparing for some kind of confrontation. "He's been destroying evidence," Agent Torres reported after reviewing the surveillance footage. "We've documented him burning materials in a large fire pit behind his cabin and making multiple trips to dispose of bags in various dumpsters around the county. The decision was made to execute search warrants immediately before Brennan could destroy additional evidence." At 6 a.m. on a grey November morning, tactical teams surrounded his property, while forensic specialists prepared to process what they hoped would be the crime scene that finally provided answers about Emily's fate. Brennan was not at his cabin when the teams arrived. His truck was gone, and neighbors reported seeing him leave before dawn, carrying what appeared to be camping gear and supplies for an extended wilderness trip. A manhunt was immediately launched, focusing on the remote areas where Brennan was most likely to seek refuge. Inside the cabin, investigators found a horrifying collection of evidence. A detailed map of the Pacific Northwest was mounted on one wall, with dozens of red pins marking locations that corresponded to unsolved missing person cases. Emily Parker's school photograph was among the collection of images and personal information that Brennan had apparently compiled about his victims. Most chilling was a handwritten journal that documented Brennan's activities over the past several years. The entries were written in a cold, clinical style that treated human hunting as a form of wilderness sport. Emily's case was detailed across multiple pages, describing how Brennan had monitored the Parker family's movements and waited for an opportunity to separate Emily from her parents. "He's been stalking families for weeks before making his move," Dr. Foster explained while reviewing the journal entries. The online communications with Emily were part of a grooming process designed to make her comfortable with the idea of exploring off-trail areas. According to Brennan's own writings, he had approached Emily's campsite during the night, using military-trained stealth techniques to avoid detection by her sleeping parents. Emily had awakened when he was examining their gear, but instead of screaming or struggling, she had quietly agreed to accompany him when he claimed to be a park ranger investigating reports of dangerous animals in the area. The journal entries suggest that Emily realized she was in danger sometime during their initial travel together. Agent Torres said grimly. She apparently attempted to escape, which forced Brennan to alter his usual methods. The manhunt for Thomas Brennan continued for 6 days, with helicopters, K-9 units, and ground teams scouring the remote wilderness areas where he was most likely to have taken refuge. His military training and intimate knowledge of the terrain made him an extremely elusive target. It was another hunter, ironically, who finally spotted Brennan's campfire smoke rising from a concealed location deep in the Olympic backcountry. By the time tactical teams reached the site, they found evidence of a hasty departure, a still warm fire pit, scattered gear, and a freshly dug pit that contained disturbing evidence of Brennan's final crimes. "We found Emily's camera buried here," Lieutenant Santos reported to the command post, along with personal effects from at least 4 other missing persons, but no sign of Brennan himself. The trail led deeper into the wilderness, towards some of the most remote and dangerous terrain in the Pacific Northwest. Search teams found increasingly desperate signs of Brennan's passage, abandoned equipment, makeshift shelters, and eventually tracks leading toward a series of steep ravines and cliff faces that even experienced mountaineers would hesitate to attempt. On the morning of the 7th day, a helicopter crew spotted a figure moving along a narrow ridge approximately 2 miles from Brennan's last known campsite. When ground teams reached the location, they found Thomas Brennan's body at the base of a 200-foot cliff. Whether he had fallen accidentally while attempting to escape or had chosen to end his life rather than face capture would never be definitively determined. But in the backpack recovered from Brennan's body, investigators found the final piece of evidence they needed to understand Emily Parker's fate. A small digital video recorder contained footage that would provide answers to the questions that had haunted her family and the investigative team for months. The truth about Emily's final hours was more tragic and more heroic than anyone had imagined, and it would forever change how the Pacific Northwest wilderness was perceived by families seeking the healing power of nature in America's most beautiful and dangerous places. The video footage recovered from Thomas Brennan's final campsite provided a heartbreaking but complete account of Emily Parker's last hours. FBI technical specialists worked for days to enhance the low-resolution recordings, revealing a story of courage and tragedy that would profoundly impact everyone involved in the investigation. Emily's ordeal had lasted nearly 18 hours from the time Brennan first approached her family's campsite. The footage showed that Emily had initially believed Brennan's claim to be a park ranger, even following him willingly when he explained that dangerous animals had been reported in their area and that her family needed to be relocated to a safer campsite. She was trying to protect her parents, Dr. Amanda Chen observed, while reviewing the psychological aspects of Emily's behavior. Even when she began to suspect that something was wrong, her primary concern was getting back to warn her mother and father. The video revealed that Emily had realized she was in danger approximately 2 hours after leaving her campsite. Brennan had led her deeper into the forest, under the pretense of taking her to where her parents were supposedly waiting at a ranger station. When Emily asked to use her phone to contact them directly, Brennan's demeanor changed dramatically. "She was incredibly brave," Agent Torres said, her voice tight with emotion as she described the footage to Emily's parents. When she understood the situation she was in, Emily didn't panic. She began looking for opportunities to escape and leave clues that might help searchers find her. Emily had managed to break away from Brennan 3 times during their forced march through the wilderness. Each time, she had deliberately left items from her backpack as trail markers, energy bar wrappers, pages from her notebook, and eventually the backpack itself, which she had thrown as high as possible into the tree branches where Marcus Webb would eventually discover it. The placement of the backpack was intentional, Detective Morrison explained. Emily knew that an experienced searcher would immediately recognize that something was wrong when they found it hanging 25 feet high. She was trying to communicate that she hadn't just wandered off on her own. Brennan's journal entries, when compared with the video evidence, revealed his growing frustration with Emily's resistance and intelligence. Unlike his previous victims, Emily had refused to be intimidated and had continuously worked to either escape or leave evidence that would expose his activities. The final confrontation occurred near a series of steep ravines, approximately 4 miles from where Emily's backpack was eventually found. According to both the video footage and Brennan's written account, Emily had discovered his collection of personal items from other victims and had realized the full scope of his crimes. She told him that people were looking for all of those missing hikers, Agent Torres recounted. She said that law enforcement would eventually figure out what he was doing and that he wouldn't be able to keep hurting people. Emily's final act of defiance occurred when Brennan attempted to force her toward a hidden campsite where he apparently intended to hold her for an extended period. Instead of complying, Emily had grabbed his hunting knife and wounded him seriously enough to create an opportunity for a final escape attempt. The video footage ended abruptly during the struggle, but Brennan's journal provided the tragic conclusion. Emily had managed to reach a cliff edge and had threatened to jump rather than accompany him further. When Brennan approached to restrain her, the rocky ground had given way, sending Emily falling into a deep ravine that was inaccessible even to experienced climbers. Brennan spent 2 days trying to reach her body, Lieutenant Santos explained to the gathered task force. His journal indicates that he could see where she had fallen, but couldn't get down to confirm her condition or retrieve her remains. The search for Emily's body became the final phase of an investigation that had already consumed months of effort and resources. Technical rescue specialists used helicopter-assisted rappelling techniques to reach the bottom of the ravine that Brennan had identified in his writings. Emily Parker's remains were recovered on December 15th, nearly 8 months after her disappearance. She was found approximately 180 feet below the cliff edge, in a location so remote and dangerous that it would have been impossible to discover through conventional search methods. The forensic evidence confirmed that Emily had died from injuries sustained in the fall, but also revealed something that provided a measure of comfort to her grieving family. She had survived the initial impact and had lived long enough to arrange some of her remaining personal items in a pattern that spelled out love, using items from her pockets. A final message to the parents who had never stopped searching for her. Dr. Foster's final behavioral analysis concluded that Emily Parker had demonstrated extraordinary courage and presence of mind throughout her ordeal. She never stopped fighting, he reported. Even in her final hours, she was thinking about her family and trying to leave them something that would provide closure and peace. The investigation ultimately connected Thomas Brennan to the disappearances of 7 people over a 5-year period across 3 states. Emily's resistance and the evidence she had managed to preserve had exposed a pattern of predatory behavior that might have continued for years without detection. The Parker family established the Emily Parker Wilderness Safety Foundation, dedicated to educating families about backcountry dangers and supporting search and rescue organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest. The Foundation's first initiative was the installation of emergency communication towers in remote areas of the Olympic Peninsula, ensuring that future hikers would have access to help even in the most isolated locations. "Emily saved lives by fighting back," David Parker said during the Foundation's dedication ceremony. "She made sure that Thomas Brennan could never hurt another family the way he hurt ours. That's the legacy we want people to remember, not that she was a victim, but that she was a hero who protected others even when she couldn't save herself." The ancient forests of the Olympic Peninsula continue to challenge and inspire hikers from around the world. But Emily Parker's story serves as a reminder that even in America's most beautiful wilderness areas, vigilance and preparation are essential for families seeking the healing and adventure that nature provides. Search and rescue teams now carry photographs of Emily Parker as a reminder of the courage and determination that can emerge even in the darkest circumstances. Her story has become part of the folklore of the Pacific Northwest, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the unbreakable bonds between parents and children that transcend even tragedy and loss. The backpack hanging in the tree had indeed been a message, not just a marker left by chance, but a deliberate communication from a brave young woman who refused to let her story end without ensuring that justice would eventually prevail in the shadows of the towering Douglas firs that had witnessed both her final struggle and her ultimate triumph over evil.